Thank you. Anyhow, this is Newsroom. Hello and welcome. As always, from Johannesburg here in South Africa, I'm Eben Jansen. The show, it's live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with our whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now today, we look at the crime statistics that were released in South Africa on Friday. Murder and contact crimes on the increase. What are your views? At SABC Newsroom, that's where we want you to tell us. We also look at the rise of the Islamic State in northern Iraq. Straight away, we'll go to where survivors are returning following the building collapse in Nigeria. Fences Timo is standing by with an update. And for those of you that don't know, today is World Rhino Day, so we'll look at that a little bit later in our show. But first, let's get the news headlines from Katrina Miller.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrina Malan, and let's take a look at the top stories this morning. 26 South Africans who suffered injuries in the collapse of the Synagogue Church of All Nations building in Nigeria are expected to arrive at the Swartkorps Air Force Base in Pretoria later this morning. All 26, among them 3 children between the ages of 2 months and 4 years, will undergo medical assessment at the Steve Biko Hospital.
Ambulances from the Gauteng Emergency Services will be waiting at the Air Force Base to transport the patients directly to the Steve Biko Hospital, where a special plan has been made to receive them.
Meanwhile, Nigerian preacher TB Joshua told the congregation yesterday that he will travel to South Africa in the coming weeks to meet the families and survivors of the building collapse at his church that killed scores of people. Joshua, who has blamed the incident on sabotage, is one of Nigeria's best-known evangelist preachers and is referred to by followers across the world as the prophet or the man of God. And back home, Johannesburg residents have been warned to brace themselves for more water shortages this week due to the depleted water supply in 4 reservoirs. The situation started a week ago when a power outage at the Acre North pumping station meant water could not be pumped into the reservoirs.
By the end of the week, if we don't have any other Murphy's Law intervening, we should be, towards the end of the week, running at levels that will be comfortable to supply everyone, even in the highline.
South Africa has vowed to push ahead with its call for the reform of the United Nations during its participation at the 69th United Nations General Assembly. President Jacob Zuma is leading a delegation of 8 cabinet ministers in New York for the annual meeting of the world body. The annual gathering will discuss, among others, climate change, the progress made in the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals, and the post-2015 Global Development Agenda. Staying with the United Nations, and yesterday more than 500,000 people took part in marches around the world ahead of tomorrow's UN Climate Summit set to take place in New York. The pressure group Avaz, which helped organize the rallies, said it was seeking to galvanize political will for a new global climate treaty by the end of 2015. Organizers of the New York rally claimed it was the largest single protest ever over climate change, with more than 300,000 people attending. They included the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and former US presidential candidate Al Gore.
Our goal for today was the largest mobilization in history on climate change, and it was about sending a signal to our politicians that this movement is coming. We're here, we're building to last, and we're going to beat the drum all the way through all of the global and national processes we're seeing until we get to a 100% clean energy economy. That's our goal.
Remember, all these top stories are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thanks, Katrine. We've got a developing story, of course. 26 South Africans who suffered injuries in the collapse of the Synagogue Church of All Nations building in Lagos, Nigeria, are expected to arrive at the Swartkorps Air Force Base in Pretoria later this morning. All 26, among them 3 children between the ages of 2 months and 4 years, will undergo medical assessments at the Steve Biko Hospital. The minister in the presidency, Jeff Radebe, says the extent of the injuries will only be known once the group arrives.
Ambulances from the Gauteng Emergency Services will be waiting at the Air Force Base to transport the patients directly to the Steve Biko Hospital, where a special plan has been made to receive them. In terms of the injuries, we'll be able to indicate with precision when the patients arrive about the extent of their injuries. The information we have at the present moment is that 6 are seriously injured and 16 are critical, and the 4 are minor injuries.
Now, the plane carrying South Africans who survived the building collapse at the Synagogue Church of All Nations in Nigeria has been slightly delayed and will now only touch down at the Swartkop Air Force Base in Pretoria after 10 a.m. instead of 7 a.m. as originally planned. An interministerial task team led by Minister in the Presidency, Jeff Radebe, is set to welcome the patients from Lagos. 86 people lost their lives when a guest house belonging to the church collapsed on September the 12th. Among those killed were 84 South Africans. Now, for the latest, we cross live to our reporter, Offenses Timo, who is at the Swartkop Air Force Base. A very good morning to you, Offenses. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Eben.
The Minister in the Presidency has appealed to the families of the injured to gather at the Steve Biko Hospital to welcome their loved ones. Just give us a little update on the latest where you are.
Okay, where I am right now, we've seen a number of ambulances entering the Swartkop Air Force Base, where it's expected where the 26 injured South Africans are set to land here at around about 10:30. It was estimated that they would land at 7 o'clock, but as the morning progressed, we heard from the GCIS spokesperson that actually there were some delays of which no reasons were given, but we were told that the plane will actually land at 10. Arrangements that were made at the Steve Biko Academic Hospital is that the families of the injured can actually assemble there and wait for them, where the social development department has arranged social workers as well to sort of debrief the families who've actually been traumatized by the experience itself.
Offense, there's a slight delay by 3 hours at the moment. Is that still the case, or is this developing?
Yes, the flight is delayed by a few hours. They haven't made it clear as to the reasons why the plane is actually delayed. We were speaking to Pumla Williams, who's the acting CEO of the GCIS earlier, and she speculated, attributing it either to weather or some logistical errors. But as things stand, we don't have a factual reason as to what could have delayed the plane as we stand. And the media contingent is also outside the Swartkop Air Force Base, as they are still making arrangements for a hangar on which we will be located, and we will be awaiting the arrival of the 26 injured.
Have you managed to talk to any of the relatives who must be hanging around waiting for the arrivals as well?
We haven't seen any relatives as yet, as the minister actually was briefing the media yesterday, said the families need to go to the Steve Biko Academic Hospital, and they must go there immediately after noon, 12 o'clock noon, where they will be debriefed by the social workers there, and arrangements have been made where the families will be reunited with those that will be landing today.
And who will be
So the families, you haven't spoken to them as yet.
And who will be receiving this delegation that's expected at the Air Force Base? Is it Minister Jeff Radebe?
As it is right now, it's not yet clear, Eben. The person that we've seen, the only official we've seen on the ground today, it's been Pumla Williams, the GCIS acting CEO. She's the one who was telling us that they've also made special arrangements for the children, the 3 children who will be among the 26 injured, who will be given some social support.
And how do we, just quickly, how do we expect this process then to continue and conclude this morning there at Swartkop's Air Force Base?
Basically, what's going to happen is that After the plane lands, the emergency personnel and ambulances, they are awaiting them inside the Swartkop Air Force Base. They are going to be ushered by the Tshwane Metro Police to ensure that there's no traffic on the way to the Steve Biko Academic Hospital, where upon arrival, social workers will be waiting for them and they will be reunited with the families. But as things stand, families of unaccounted members of the South African delegation that was in Nigeria is also prompted to also contact the government, as there are certain bodies that were seriously injured beyond recognition, of which the government will also need some DNA tests to sort of ascertain the identities of those that are still yet to come.
Well, Fancy, thank you very much for that update. That's our reporter, Fancy Stimo, outside the Swartkop Air Force Base. Of course, survivors are expected to start streaming into the airport there this morning. 26 South Africans who suffered injuries are expected to arrive there shortly after 10 o'clock this morning. Now, we move on. Is South Africa winning the war on crime? That's a question we want your views on today after crime statistics were released on Friday. Murder, attempted murder, and some other contact crimes have increased, while rape and sexual offences have dropped. Now, Police Minister Nkosinathi Nhleko said the country's 5-year trend showed persistent problems of contact crimes, while there was also an increase in social unrest. Of particular concern is the fact that the murder rate increased for a second year in succession. The good news, on the other hand, was that commercial crime, stock theft, and especially sexual offences showed a downward trend. We invited National Police spokesperson Solomon Machale, but he's not able to attend. And from the Institute of Security Studies, we have the head of their Governance, Crime and Justice Division, Gareth Newham, in studio with us today. Good morning, Gareth. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
Let's start with the ISS. You've had your scenarios around crime statistics with the police in the recent past, but just give us your reaction on the statistics that were released on Friday.
Well, I think these statistics have to serve as a wake-up call to all South Africans, because it shows that we have a long way to go before we get on top of the crime problem in South Africa. And in fact, we see violent crime going up for 2 years now in a row. The most serious violent crime categories, namely murder, attempted murder, and then are very worrying for us and for most South Africans would be the robberies. So 13,500 more robberies last year than the previous year. Far more people have been attacked in the streets, in their homes, in their workplaces, more cars being hijacked. So those crimes really drive fear, they undermine social cohesion, and they really make it more difficult for us to achieve other developmental goals in South Africa. So this is a wake-up call. These are not good stats at all.
It's a genuine threat to the future of the country. It's easy, though, to stand on one side of the fence and criticize the police, obviously, who have a very difficult job as it is. But what's the solution, according to the ISS, in dealing with contact crime in South Africa?
Well, if you look at the categories that are going up, when you look at murders and attempted murders, most of those crimes, the victim knows the perpetrator. So you can't just police that crime down. It's not something that you can say, the police must get our murder down. Because the factors that lead to murder are social in nature. Murder is very concentrated in particular parts of the country, particularly those areas that are very underdeveloped. There's a lot of poverty, a lot of social pressure. So in order to reduce the murder rate and the kinds of factors that lead to high levels of violence, we have to look at not just the police. The police, we need to do something about in terms of how they are able to build confidence in them so they can go after the robbers, because the crimes that the police can get down are robberies. So we need to have an approach that says, right, to reduce violence, we have to look at social welfare with children, teachers, frontline health care workers. How do you ensure that we start investing now so that over the next 10 years we see continued drops in the level of violence, especially indicated by murder, as we have for the last 10 years. Murder's dropped by more than 50% over the last 20 years, but now it's going up again. So we need to look at that. On the one hand, the robberies, where gangs of people, criminals with weapons, attack you in your houses or when you're walking to or from a taxi rank to go to work, and that's something the police can go on top of. And so they need to look at crime intelligence and develop a proper strategy for that, because they need to be able to combine their resources across different kinds of policing functions, make sure they're well coordinated, identify the perpetrators, arrest them and bring them before the courts with enough evidence to make sure they get prosecuted.
crime intelligence is the one thing that I want to take out of what you've just said. We see continuously syndicates operating in South Africa, crime syndicates who are very successful and who often target the easy targets, the soft underbelly of society. Are we doing enough on that front, crime intelligence, and how do we then improve our crime intelligence as the police in South Africa?
Well, fortunately, the problems of affecting crime intelligence have been recognised. So last year when the South African Police Service annual report was tabled in Parliament, we saw big reductions in the productivity of that division in the police. So far fewer interceptions, surveillance operations, that kind of thing. So clearly there's a problem there, and that is something that has been recognised by the National Commissioner of Police. She said this division is ailing. So it's really something that needs to be looked at quite urgently, because the longer crime intelligence is not able to identify the syndicates and how they operate and make sure that they are neutralised, people arrested, they grow, they become more powerful, they are more able to corrupt police officers and other people and have more damage on the economy. So we need to start looking at the existing resources, those that have got the background, the skills, the expertise in the crime intelligence environment. If they're not in that division, and many have left over the last few years, bring those back once they've been properly vetted so we know that they're not involved in crime themselves, and then really try and stabilize that, give a new head that's permanently appointed, that knows what they're doing, because that division's really had a lot of problems the last couple of years.
I saw last week that the police also put a reputation management tender out recently. What does that say? Do you feel that the image of the police needs that sort of attention to win over the confidence of the public?
Well, clearly by putting out that tender, the police management thinks so. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. Look, it's important for the police to have the trust of the communities they serve. Otherwise, we simply won't get on top of a lot of our crimes. Whether it's enough to have a reputational management agency do that, I don't think so. I think it is important that people realize that a lot of cops, men and women out there, do really good work under very difficult circumstances. Not all police are bad, but we do have a problem. To get that level of trust up, it's about making sure that you recognize, reward, and support those cops that are going beyond the call of duty and really doing their work properly. And on the other hand, making sure that all those officers who undermine the image of the police service because they're corrupt, they're brutal, or they're lazy, are quickly identified and removed. That's how you'll eventually start changing people's perceptions and experiences of the South African Police Service.
What about good citizenry? Are we battling good citizenry in South Africa? It is the key to a functional society. How do we get our citizens to start taking responsibility and interacting with the police the way that we want to or need to?
Well, I think that's why it's important that the police urgently implement the recommendations of the National Development Plan that was adopted by Cabinet. So we actually have a plan that is very constructive in the way it says, look, we need an active citizenry, but the citizens will, in order to be active, need to be able to trust the agencies of the state. So there has to be a sea change in the way we deal with the police. And if those recommendations, establishing a national policing board that's multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary, so we get various skill sets that aren't existing right now in the police, bring them in. They set very clear standards for the senior management. They assess all the senior managers so we know that the men and women at the top of the organization who have the responsibility for improving policing are the right people. Because you've seen too often many people being shunted out, fired, some irregularly. There seems to be ongoing problems at the very top of the organization. Fortunately, the National Development Plan recognizes that and puts forward some very concrete steps that have to be done to improve the top of the organization so that the whole organization can start improving. So we need to see those recommendations implemented soon.
What about this belief amongst the citizens that police are often involved in crime? How do you overcome that as the police?
Well, unfortunately, it's not just a perception. We know that police officers are sometimes involved in crime because they get arrested by their colleagues. It is important to recognize that police officers are arresting their colleagues. So that is how you end up improving policing. They need to set up, and this was something that was raised a couple of years ago, an internal investigation unit. We used to have an anti-corruption unit. You need to have a specialized unit within the police that does nothing but go after those police officers that are involved in crime so that it deters others, but you can remove those there because those officers are really fundamentally undermining the image of the police service and undermining safety in a very bad way.
What about this idea that there's a growing foreign criminal element in South Africa that is undermining the entire country and that's driving up the crime statistics that we see because they simply have no connection with this country and often the proceeds of that sort of criminal behavior is shipped out of the country?
Well, every country has some level of international syndication going, crime syndicates. I think it's very difficult, and I would, at this point, have not yet seen any research or data that shows that the reason we have a big crime problem is primarily because of foreign nationals. Certainly a vast majority of the crime committed in South Africa is committed by South African citizens. People who live here are South Africans. And when you do have some of those syndicates and those groups that are consisting of foreign nationals, often work quite closely with South Africans in South Africa. So I don't think if we want to improve the crime situation, we start trying to worry about foreign nationals, because in many cases they can actually be a huge support to us. We need to make sure that our agencies work, our police work, and that we build relationship between all communities, no matter who they consist of, and the police, because the number of criminals are actually much smaller than the number of people who just want to live their lives in a normal way.
That's true. Now, one of the other statistics that's risen, and that's alarming, is the rise in social unrest in South Africa. Is there a link between criminality and social unrest, and how do we arrest that?
Well, it's not a direct link. What it really does is when you start having what we've seen now, this growth in violent public protests, which require police intervention. And we're now looking at 1,900 instances. So that's 5 or 6 every day on average. The police are called out because a community or a group of people in public are disrupting the roads or blocking the roads, burning tires, that kind of thing. Now, how that affects criminality is that it draws police resources away from doing patrols and crime combating operations towards public order policing operations. So it takes a fair amount of the police resources that could otherwise be directed towards crime fighting, towards social unrest. And so therefore the police resources are stretched thin. Also, when the police go into those areas, they come across very angry communities because the reasons why they're protesting are something else. If the police come in and start firing rubber bullets and tear gas at them, it undermines community trust in the police. And again, it's easy for criminals to operate in those environments.
Finally, what about the prevalence of alcohol and drugs that fuel criminality in our society, and how does that play out? Do we need more taverns than we have schools in our communities?
No, we ideally have more schools than taverns, but once again, it's not a simple thing because the link between violent crime and alcohol abuse is definitely there, but most people who drink alcohol don't necessarily go out and commit violent crime. So it's a tricky thing to try and manage, but we do have to get on top of high levels of alcohol abuse and drug abuse and make sure that our policies and procedures are actually in place that minimize the kind of damage that these substances can do in societies.
Well, thank you very much. Gareth Newham for joining us today. He's the head of Governance, Crime and Justice Division at the Institute for Security Studies. Just want to point out that we did invite National Police spokesperson Solomon Machale to come and talk to us today. He said he will be here, but unfortunately didn't show up for the interview today. Let's take a look now at your comments. What are you talking about? Megan van der Poel says, so sad to be South African with the crime stats released. There must be a way. The way is for us all to get involved, Megan. Let's be good citizens. Millie Pili says, crime stats, why do police not set traps to catch these syndicates? They do. Trust me, they do. Andile says, crime stats, so long as blacks live in subhuman conditions created to give comfort to white life, we have no hope of ending crime in South Africa. I don't quite know if it's simple as that, but we do have the most unequal society in the world. There you have the numbers. That's from the ISS, of course, sitting here, all the numbers in pictures. First infographic on the raw numbers, and yes, most of it is up. The one bit of good news is that rape and sex crimes have come down. Half of South Africa's murder occur in only 13% of 1,127 police precincts, and that in itself says something. Well, let's now take a look at the front pages of the world. Taking a look at the Nigerian paper, The Vanguard, this morning. Well, it seems the building collapse at the Synagogue of All Nations Church has yet to make the front page of The Vanguard more than a week after the paper. Instead, the paper is reporting on the Nigerian military's recent success in capturing Boko Haram militants. Also a pressing issue, it seems, in that country. But the media there have come under scrutiny, this after reports and tweets this weekend by reporters and journalists saying that Prophet TB Joshua has offered bribes to many journalists not to report on the tragic building collapse. This was an allegation made by a Nigerian journalist, Nicholas Ibekwe. Here you see it on Twitter. He says that he has also provided audio proof to back up his claim. There you have the tweets Nicholas sent out over the weekend. Then moving on to the front page of the International New York Times, a striking photo on the front page marking the one-year anniversary of the Westgate Mall attack in Kenya. Hundreds of people attended a candlelight vigil outside the Nairobi shopping mall where at least 67 people were killed. Then the sports pages in the United Kingdom reporting on Lewis Hamilton, whose dream came true as he reclaimed the lead in the Formula One World Championship with victory at the Singapore Grand Prix. There you have a beautiful picture of champagne flowing after that race last night. Now, this week is all about looking back and appreciating the history, culture, tradition, times we come from as we prepare to celebrate Heritage Day this Wednesday. On that note, today in history, in 1828, Shaka Zulu, the Zulu king and founder of the Zulu Empire, was murdered by his bodyguard and his two half-brothers, Dingaan and Mhlangana, after a relatively brief period as king of the Zulu people. From 1816 it was. His death came a year after his mother's death. Shaka Zulu's memory is still very much alive today, known as one of the most famous, notorious leaders to have ever graced the African continent. Heritage Day on Wednesday it is, not Bride Day. This is Newsroom. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to you with Newsroom on SABC News. The Islamic State has dominated international headlines during recent weeks. We saw the President of the United States, Barack Obama, announcing an open-ended bombing campaign against a militant group that will extend now into Syria just last week. This came after it was widely reported that 3 men have been beheaded by the IS. Now, while it appears that the group are pressuring world leaders to bow to their demands, we today talked to a man who has just recently returned from northern Iraq, the Deputy Director of the Middle East and North Africa Division at Human Rights Watch, Mr. Joe Stork. Good morning, Mr. Stork. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
You've just come back from northern Iraq. Just give us a little picture as to what the latest developments are regarding the IS and how people are dealing with this on the ground.
I arrived at the very beginning of August, and when I left Washington, ISIS had taken over the city of Mosul. When I arrived 2 days later, the whole scene had changed. They had moved up into Sinjar. They were going after the Yazidis. That's hundreds of thousands of Yazidis live there in Sinjar. That's a kind of syncretic religion that precedes Islam and Christianity. So they're seen as apostates, by people like ISIS. So overnight, we had a situation where tens of thousands of people were out of their homes with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Not even their ID cards that would enable them to function anymore. They had retreated into the Kurdish-controlled areas, which is where I was in Erbil. It was a terrible, terrible scene, and I was talking with people who had relatives, Yazidis, who had family, mothers, sisters, and brothers who weren't able to escape. And of course, there have been thousands of abductions of people, particularly women and girl children, and their relatives, and none of us, for that matter, really know what's happened to them. It's a terrible situation.
Now we've seen, let's call it the Western media, the like. We've seen beheadings, the kind of videos that have been on YouTube and so forth. Is the international media telling us the full story of what is happening in Iraq right now?
Well, I think, this story is being promoted by IS itself. I mean, they're the ones who produce these videos. They obviously have a very skilled media department, not only these beheading videos, other atrocities. So this is what the anarchists used to call propaganda of the deed. I mean, they are putting it out there to, I think, do two things. One is certainly inspire terror in the surrounding communities, and number two, I think they're actually trying to bait the international community to sort of picking a fight with them.
What do they want?
What do they want? The IS people? That's pretty hard to tell. I mean, these claims of starting a caliphate, where, I mean, it's totally preposterous, for one thing. It's an extremely intolerant variant of Islam, of Sunni Islam, so that if you're not a Muslim, and if you're not a Sunni Muslim, then you're in big trouble if you're under their control. In fact, even if you are a Sunni Muslim, if you're not prepared to sort of go along with the social commands in terms of women not coming out of the houses, not working, not going to school, these kinds of things. If you're seen smoking, never mind having a drink of something alcoholic, I mean, forget it. You're in big trouble. Your life is at stake. So I really wonder, the people, the Sunni population in Western Iraq were somewhat receptive to their coming in as kind of liberators because of the terrible treatment they've experienced under the former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki and his government security forces and pro-government militias. So it's really atrocities on that side that has created this receptivity among Sunnis to the whole ISIS campaign. But I have to wonder if the people in Mosul, who've now been under ISIS for two months going on 3, how much they're seeing them as liberators these days.
This humanitarian crisis is obviously escalating.
Yeah.
Will the U.S. action that was announced by Barack Obama, will it help the situation there, and will it help those people that are displaced?
It possibly will. It will help. It could help spare them from further attack. I mean, look, even today, we've got a situation where IS forces are moving on the town of Kobani in northwestern Syria. It's a Kurdish town where hundreds of thousands of people had already taken refuge. So one could imagine that bombings, drone strikes, this kind of thing could help stop the IS advance. So in that sense, yes. In terms of enabling people to return to their homes and so forth, I mean, that's another story. I think we're still looking at over hundreds of thousands of people who've been displaced, again, now in the space of just a few weeks. Winter coming on in what's a very cold part of Iraq and Syria in the mountains and so forth. And that's not something bombing can help. What you need there is a tremendous influx of humanitarian aid and assistance from the international community.
What about the neighboring countries? We see the Kurds have taken quite a tough stance against them. What about the other countries around Iraq? How are they affected and what are they doing?
Well, let's go to the east, Iran. A Shia, largely Shia population there, Shia government in Iran, obviously very hostile to the kind of Sunni brand that ISIS represents. So but they're part of the problem in a way because they've been funding, training these pro-government Iraqi militias that are a big part of the problem. So they're in the fight against IS, but again, they're part of the side that's been responsible for creating the problem in the first place. The other states, the Arab states, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and so forth, it's unclear how much. It seems like Saudi Arabia is providing military a military base where Syrian rebels can be trained and this sort of thing. So people are in it a little bit. They've got their right foot in. It's not clear they've got their left foot in. Turkey is the big question mark, I think, because IS, as well as other Syrian groups fighting the Syrian government, have had a pretty easy time going back and forth across the Turkish border. There are Turkish recruits in IS, and until very recently, there were something like 49 Turkish diplomats who have been taken hostage.
Very concerning indeed, a real legitimate threat to, well, not just democracy in that region, but one would think it could be exported around the world. Thank you very much.
First and foremost, a threat to the Iraqis and Syrians who are under IS control.
Thank you very much for joining us today. That's the Deputy Director, Middle East and North Africa, Human Rights Watch, Mr. Joe Stork, joining us today. He's just back from northern Iraq, giving us his views as to what is happening on the ground. Let's take a quick look at what's on our social media page. Of course, Paul Tsietsimonade, our environmentalist, is in New York at the moment. He says missing out on the March for Climate Change because of a long line getting my accreditation, which is not fun at all. He's in New York for that conference. His Lordship here says, first for me today, chased after a city power truck to get my neighbor and my power reconnected. Me am normal? Never, he says. Leonardo DiCaprio, well, there's one from, he says, tar sands, oil mining damages communities, water, land and wildlife, and drives climate change. Take action, says Leo. And there you have a picture here from Johannesburg. Some hailstones, save some hailstones, says Nicholas, from last night's Gauteng hailstorm. That was on Saturday night. Insurance asked me to prove who did it. Well, hailstones the size of golf balls. That's something we all went through this weekend. There you have photos. Worldwide Climate Change March sees massive turnout. That is happening in New York, reported on by our very own Sherwin Bryce Pease. And back home, of course, hail damage has been the talk of the town here in Johannesburg. One could simply do the Ice Bucket Challenge with this weather. That was a very nice one. Let's move on. Let's take a look at what's on our Facebook page now. We see that the 26 South Africans who were injured when the Synagogue Church of All Nations in Nigeria collapsed will arrive in the country this morning. And also a suspected rhino poaching ringleader and 9 accomplices are expected to appear in the Hatfield Magistrates Court in Pretoria today. We also see that the Democratic Alliance plans to write to the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Maite Nkwana Moshabane, urging to assist South African victims and the families to file class action suit against the Nigerian pastor T.B. Joshua's church. You can find this and a whole lot more on our Newsroom Facebook page. Now, on a lighter note, waking up in the morning, especially on a Monday, is not always the easiest thing to do. However, be aware that it's not just human beings who struggle with that alarm clock beeping away. Here's a little something we found on YouTube that might help getting up this Monday morning a little bit easier. Happy Monday and the rest of the week from all of us here at Newsroom.
Zoom into Africa. This is Libya. The chairman of the General National Congress is Mr. Nouri Abu Samen. Libya got independent from Italy on 10 February in 1947. The population is more than 6 million people. One of Libya's major languages spoken is Arabic. Monetary unit, Libyan dinar.
and welcome back to Newsroom. I'm Katri Malan, and let's take a look at the top stories this morning. 26 South Africans who suffered injuries in the collapse of the Synagogue Church of All Nations building in Nigeria are expected to arrive at the Swartkop Air Force Base in Pretoria later this morning. All 26, among them 3 children between the ages of 2 months and 4 years, will undergo medical assessment at the Steve Biko Academic Hospital. Meanwhile, Nigerian preacher TB Joshua told the congregation yesterday that he will travel to South Africa in the coming weeks to meet the families and survivors of the building collapse at his church that killed scores of people. Joshua, who has blamed the incident on sabotage, is one of Nigeria's best-known evangelist preachers and is referred to by followers across the world as the prophet or the man of God. And then South Africa has vowed to push ahead with its call for the reform of the United Nations during its participation in the 69th United Nations General Assembly. President Jacob Zuma is leading a delegation of 8 cabinet ministers in New York for the annual meeting of the world body. The annual gathering will discuss, among others, climate change, the progress made in the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals, and the post-2015 Global Development Agenda. Remember, all those top stories and more are all available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thanks, Katrine. Today is World Rhino Day, and the latest news is 3 Sandparks employees have been arrested in connection with rhino poaching in the Kruger National Park. This after a freshly killed rhino carcass was found in the lower Sabi area of the park. The day is also meant to celebrate all 5 species of rhino: black, white, greater one-horn, Sumatran and Javan. World Rhino Day was first announced by the World Wildlife Fund in South Africa in 2010. The following year, World Rhino Day grew into an international success, encompassing both African and Asian rhino species. Now, recently, our producer, Neen Dormel, spoke to Dr. Raina Marie Loader, the director of Horn, a documentary that takes a bit of a different look at the issue of rhino poaching. Have a look at that interview.
The documentary investigates the issue of rhino poaching by focusing on the work anti-poaching units in South Africa's Waterberg region in Limpopo does. The film also gives insight to rhino monitor training that serves as a strategy to protect not only rhinos but also the betterment of communities. Later this year, the film will be shown at the United Nations Assembly in Vienna. Now, today we are joined by the director, Dr. Raina Marie Loader, to talk about the documentary. But before we chat her, let's have a look at the trailer of Horn.
South Africa has reached a record number this year.
A decade ago, the country was losing about 15 animals a year to poachers.
Money should not really be the object of what your desire is.
The going price of a rhino horn on the black market is currently in the region of $55,000.
I'm not a name anymore, I'm a call. Your rhino monitors, ordered in droves, can be real, can be clandestine, push poachers away from.
Now authorities in South Africa are taking extreme measures.
We don't earn so much, and those people who are just sitting and just doing the talking, they earn much.
What would make me feel like I'm heading towards a goal is joining your documentary team and heading out into something unknown, but something that clearly needs people to get involved.
Once the animal's down, probably comes off in about a minute, 2 minutes. 15 minutes later, they're in Mozambique, safe haven.
They're a wonderful, innocent beast. Absolutely innocent.
And if you don't know where your next meal's going to come from, and somebody says to you, listen, here's 10,000 in your back pocket.
They offered him 35,000 Rand to say, when we were off the property.
People are going into tourism, which is a good thing, but it needs some sort of skill. There's no training for such things around here.
Don't forget the recruits are in training, so they're not in a situation that they're actually in a position where they've got to think for themselves.
The guy on the ground is briefed to what he needs to know, and he must accept that.
I've never been in anything like this. I just dumped all my gear down in some tent in the bush. I actually don't know what's going on. I don't even know what's going to happen.
Now, Dr. Rainer Marie, thank you so much for joining us in studio today. I would just like to know, you were born in South Africa, currently you live abroad, but then why this decision to make a documentary surrounding the issue of rhino poaching?
Well, I think internationally it's a very important issue. I mean, I started working on this film way back in 2009 when word about rhino poaching started to seep through into the international community, and really the eyes of the world is on South Africa in relation to what it would do regarding the rhino poaching crisis. So I think it is important to really push the issue forward and really concentrate on a media level and on a filmic level on what it is South Africa has to do and what is really at stake in any decision making that the country makes regarding the rhino.
And you say this whole process started in 2009. I mean, can you just talk us through what has happened since then and why exactly the Waterberg region?
Well, I started in 2009 trying to raise funds to make a film about it. And at the time there wasn't very much going on about the crisis. Nobody really knew much about it. And I didn't manage to raise money until 2011 when it really hit the international stage. And I decided to go to the Waterberg region because it's an area that is struggling with rhino poaching, but it is also an area that struggles with some social problems. And I wanted to kind of compare these two issues and see how they might be interrelated, and if so, what are we supposed to do about it?
Yes, and then in the documentary, like you say, you focus on those two aspects of not just the impact on rhinos, but the impact on people. So what did you find when you were filming?
Well, we filmed relatively close to the Valwater area, and it was very evident that since the end of apartheid, a lot has happened in this region, very positive and quite negative as well. Because if you look at the history since apartheid, that whole area has been transformed into an area focused on game lodges, whereas before it was focused on farming, things like beans, maize. And as a result, this very positive change in terms of conservation meant that many people have lost their jobs. So they had to leave the farms where they previously worked as farm workers, and they had to go to Valwater in the town. So we've seen a massive increase of homeless people, people who are jobless, and social issues come with that, because lodge owners don't really need those kind of skills anymore. They need people with diplomas in game management, etc., etc. So that reality of conservation in that area had brought some kind of a real crisis in terms of human issues. So that has an impact on how rhino poaching has developed from the perspective of the film. And so we look at what we can do regarding the reality of these people and how to help these people through helping the rhino.
Yes, and then I would also like to know, you also focused on the effectiveness of anti-poaching units. What did you find regarding that?
Well, it is important to make a very big distinction between rhino monitors and the work of rangers. The film is very much focused on the work of monitors, and it's the very entry level of anti-poaching, where people are asked to follow the rhinos, look around for spoors, see if there are people who came into the reserve during the night. So it's like kind of the first eyes on the ground. And then we get to the rangers who are with armed response. So these are the people, the rhino monitors are the ones that really are the first people that we need in terms of keeping the rhinos safe. And they are also people that we can use from these communities who have no other job. And it's a real opportunity to create jobs for them and really benefit the communities.
Well, Rainer Marie, it's definitely a documentary I think everyone has to see, as we also look at World Rhino Day this month. Thank you so much for joining us in studio today, and we really hope that with the United Nations, this serious message does get out.
Thank you very much for having me. Yes.
Well, let's take a look at some of the comments around Rhino Day, World Rhino Day, and then poaching. Brent Lindekeys says, unicorns are real, they're just chubby, grey, and we call them rhinos. Protect them. World Rhino Day, of course, is today. There you have a lovely picture benefiting local communities. WWF Scotland says, it's World Rhino Day. Help us raise awareness about rhinos and how we can protect them. I am for rhinos, the hashtag. Another beautiful picture. Ashwell Glasson says, today, World Rhino Day is about you helping to secure the rhino and its future. What are you doing to make it, well, to make the world a better place, really? But that's where we wrap it. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park in Johannesburg every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a total rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning. We also stream live on YouTube at that time with our whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. You know we love it in the morning.